Hello, and welcome to the September 2024 meeting of Triangle Association of Freelancers. Our guest this evening is Rhonda McKnight, a Christian romance and women's fiction author who will be in conversation this evening with Tara Minter. Rhonda, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I'm going to read a brief introduction and then I'll get into the questions. And after that, we'll open it up for the members to ask questions of you. All right. Rhonda McKnight is the author of 27 books. Bitter and Sweet is her latest release. She has also written several award-winning bestsellers, including An Inconvenient Friend. She's the winner of the 2015 Emma Award for Inspirational Romance of the Year for her title, Unbreak My Heart. Rhonda has been nominated 3 times for the African American Literary Award. She writes inspirational book club fiction and Christian romance stories about complex characters in crisis. Her goal is to touch the heart of women with the themes of faith, forgiveness, and hope. Originally from a small coastal town in New Jersey, she writes from the comfort of her South Carolina home. Thank you again for joining us. I am interested to know what inspired you to become a writer.
Well, what inspires anybody to become a writer? I think I'm like a lot of writers. I just always wrote from the time I was very young. When I say very young, about 6 years old. At that age, it was kind of pictures that I was drawing. My dad was in tech school and he was taking a drafting class and he used to have these big sheets of paper. And whenever he messed one up, he would give it to me and I would take it on the back and I would draw pictures and I would do this storyboarding type of thing. And I wrote my first book when I was 6 about a family of mice that lived under the boardwalk in Asbury Park where I grew up. And so I continued to write all the way through high school. I always tried to write novels. I've never written poetry unless it was assigned to me in school or any short stories. Just always wanted to write books because I love to read books. And then when I worked, as editor in a school paper, things like that. But then when I got to college, I was so busy with college life that I totally stopped writing and did not think about writing again until I was probably 28, 29 years old. I was reading, I think it was one of Terry McMillan's books. And I remember telling my husband, oh, I used to be a writer, like I could do this. And so he said, oh, well, really? So what do you need? And I said, well, I think if I had a computer, I'd probably write a book. So computers were really expensive back then. We're talking like 1995. So he worked overtime. He bought me this computer. We got set up. All I did was get on the internet. Back I was on AOL, like whatever, I was surfing the internet. I said, I think I'd probably write a book if you bought me, if I had a comfortable desk. So he's like, oh, well, let's get you a desk, So got me this great desk. And again, I just got more comfortable with the internet, And then finally I said, I think that I would probably write a book if I had a better chair. So at that point I thought, Rhonda, either you're going to write a book or you're not. And like none of these things have ever mattered to writing a book. People wrote books with notebooks and sitting on the floor. Like I think about other authors that I know that have written books on notebooks, literally 70-sheet notebooks as they were traveling on the train to work. And so I just realized I needed to discipline myself. And so we moved from New Jersey to Georgia, Atlanta, and I joined the Georgia Romance Writers Association. And there I was surrounded by all these authors because this was a large group and about probably over 200 members, maybe more than that. But there were like a third were published, as romance writers and some mystery writers and, thriller writers. And so I was like, okay, I'm around my people and I can do this. And so I started taking some writing workshops, reading some craft books because I had never done that before. And just became more determined that I wanted to be a writer. So it's kind of, I think it's always been in me. Mm-hmm. Although some days I think I'm a better editor than I am a writer. And why am I a writer? But anyway, yeah, I'm here writing books.
Well, I listened to a podcast episode of Black and Published where you were featured,
Mhm.
and it was interesting to me that not only did you write or join the writers group, but you also joined the critique group. So how did those two groups help you on your journey?
Well, they were most instrumental in me becoming serious about writing. The writers group, I just mentioned, Georgia Romance Writers, I joined. And I think one of the things that I learned from being a part of that group and as a result of being a part of that group, going to book signings and things for authors who were in that group, was that I humanized writers. They were no longer like superheroes. It was like these women put on their pants one leg at a time. The only difference between me and them is that they had finished. They had finished. And so that was the benefit of the writers group. Other than, like I said, we had monthly craft lessons. People exchanged craft books or shared at least what they were doing. We had opportunities for critique. Now, I will say, the opportunity that I had for critique was my first critique with a published author. I was really excited about. I did not put forth my best effort. I just sort of turned something in really kind of, I don't know, it was silly, sort of haphazard. And she critiqued it, and she was as kind as she could possibly be, but it was really horrible. And I decided I wasn't a writer. I came home from that meeting literally sick. I laid around on the bed for like 2 days. I decided I wasn't a writer. I signed up to go back to school, and I was going to solely focus on my career. And I did not write a thing for, I think, maybe 2 years, almost 3 years. And so then I started thinking about my purpose. Like, I had moved up in my job. I really enjoyed it, but I knew it wasn't like that. That wasn't where the real gifts that I wanted, to use lie. And so I started thinking about it, and I had this really spiritual moment with God, this conversation with God, where he reminded me that I was a writer and that I had abandoned that. And so I said, well, I need help. And so I had previously posted 2 years ago
Mhm.
in a message board group about needing a critique group. And so out of nowhere, like literally I have this conversation in prayer, and like the next day I have a message on this. I can't even remember. It was some kind of threaded, we talking about 2003, some kind of threaded thing. And she said, oh, I see that you want to be a part of a critique group. I'm in a critique group here in Atlanta. If you come to our meeting, you can kind of see how we're set up, and then maybe you can go find some writers and duplicate our model. So I went to that meeting. Long story short, I was like, y'all have to let me join. I can't go find no new writers. Y'all have to love me and let me in. And they did. And so these
Okay.
people are still like my best friends to this day. But the critique group was helpful in that everyone who was in that group, see, I believe firmly in a critique group if it's the right mix of people. I've heard a lot of horror stories. I'm very fortunate that I've never had to deal with a horror story. We loved each other. There were only 10 of us. It was supposed to be 9, but 3 and 3 and 3, but here comes Rhonda. And so there were only 10 of us. I think five of us ended up being traditionally published within a very short time. We were serious craft women. We read a lot. We critiqued each other. We were very serious writers. And because we all knew that we loved each other, we were able to take the critique without being sensitive about it. Everybody was really mature about it, and everyone was really serious about wanting to see their sister be published. So it was a beautiful experience. I tell people now that I strongly believe in critique because I think that iron sharpens iron, and that if people are studying, and if the composition of the critique group is, if it's made up of good stuff, like people who are actually writing, people who have studied writing enough to give good feedback, people who care about the people that they're critiquing, like really care about them, and like there's no hurt feelings or nasty personalities, or people who have personality issues who don't know how to deliver bad news or good news. that it can be a beautiful thing to help you grow as a writer, because I grew up as a writer in that group. So that was my experience. I think that both writers groups and critique groups can be helpful. Critiques groups more so only if you find the right mix. And then if you don't, it doesn't have to be a group though. You can find critique partners that are helpful. So yeah, I believe in critique.
Okay. So in your writing process, which do you develop first, characters or plot?
So typically that depends. In the past, I've written, I think I've written 28 books. I think 27 of them are published.
Okay.
And so I think that I've always sort of been I'm a character-driven writer. I write stories about people in situations, people who have a crisis, and women. And so I think that in the past, I've always kind of started with a character. A character came to me, I saw this character doing this thing, and then I thought, oh, that's interesting. And then I began to try to figure out, like, is this a story? Is this something that can work? With my last book, and I think this is the only book that I've written this way, the story came to me first, and I had to fold the characters into it.
Wow.
The characters came second. So, but typically I see a woman, I see her situation, she begins to sort of talk in my head. I go, oh girl, what's going on with you? What's this or that? And then I'm like, you might be a book, And so, so that's kind of usually the way it starts. Sometimes it can start with, just an idea, like with a story on the news or a conversation that my parents are having. Now that I'm incorporating history in my books, my parents are 79 and 80, and so I live with them now, doing some caregiving. And so I'm learning all this stuff about my family that you didn't learn when you was a teenager, because nobody was telling this stuff,
Yep.
family secrets and gossip. And so, so they're sharing these little things. And then, I sort of ask them questions. And so I feel like going forward, I just have this sense of my stories coming from situations, and then I'll find the character. That's what's happening with the current project also. So, yeah.
One of the things I really enjoyed about your story and learning more about you is that you've been independently published, but also traditionally published. So can you share your experiences both ways?
Both have so many advantages. Sometimes I think indie has more. But, and when I say more, I'm just, I think I got spoiled being an indie writer. I started off traditionally published. Like that was absolute the must. Like I don't think I ever would have published a book on my own. I mean, maybe I would have, but being traditionally published was in my mind, it was the gold ring. It was the standard. And so that's what I wanted to do. And that was the goal of everybody in my writers group. And so, so I got my first deal with a traditional publisher. 3 books were released before our imprint went away. It was dissolved under, like, oh, these books aren't selling. It was Christian fiction, and it was an ABA publisher, and it just wasn't working out. And so they dissolved our imprint. And I thought, well, I'm done with this writing thing. It was fun. I went on a couple of vacations with the money, I'm over it. And so a friend of mine said to me, Rhonda, and this was 2013, when everybody had started self-publishing, because Kindle was, KDP was happening. And so it was much easier. And so she said, Rhonda, you can't stop writing. Like, you're a really good writer. You got to write more. Now, mind you, she was my favorite author and she had stopped writing, but that's a whole nother conversation. And so she said, just write something fun. My novels at that time had been Christian relationship fiction, contemporary Christian relationship fiction, and they were all about pretty serious themes. Couples in crisis, divorce, and mistresses, and just really kind of like heavy stuff. And so she said, write something fun. Because I love reading romance at the time. I loved reading romance. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll write a romance. So I wrote this romance, and I did this challenge with a friend, another author friend. And I wrote this novella. It was a 40,000 word novella I wrote it in 14 days. She and I were competing for who could do the most words a day. And so I finished it, and I looked at it and I thought, I think this is kind of good. But I don't know, I sent it to my friend, who continues to be one of my the one that told me to keep writing. She continues to be my personal freelance editor. And I sent it to her and I said, girl, I don't know. What is, she said, oh my gosh, this is so good. Let me edit it. Let me get it out. But I was really nervous about it because I had not published romance. And this was a romance, and readers aren't going to want that from me. So I published it and it did really well. I liked being paid every month. I liked being able to log in and see my sales. I liked having control. And for the next, that was the first book. For another 22, maybe 22 books, I think, I enjoyed having complete control over when I wrote, when I released a book, how my deadlines. If I marketed more, I could see, oh, I made more money because I did something. Like, I loved that. I loved that my stories could be whatever length I wanted them to be. I have several series, and I just write a story until it's done. I know there's some people that feel like, oh, well, if you're going to write books in a series, they should all, kind of be around the same length. Well, blah, blah, blah. Rhonda does what she wants to do. I have this one series here that is 10 books. I think I have 9 of them here. I'm just going to show you 9 of them here, that they are all very much different lengths. Wow. I write till the story is done, and this was a series that did extremely well for me. I mean, really, really well for me.
Is that the Bennett series?
That's the Bennett series. Those Bennetts were hot. So they were some pandemic candy, I think. So I loved not having to be subject to a word count. Just like everything about it. The only thing that probably and I had a great editor. The only thing that was probably hard was learning how to use social media ads was difficult. And I think that I've never really learned how to use them. And, I'm not great about covers. Like, even though people always say, oh, you have the best covers, like I really sweat through these covers, really badly. And then also finding stock photos with Black people on them is always an issue. Okay. There's always less. And then the pandemic made it worse because people weren't having photo shoots. So I enjoyed both. Being traditionally published has the unique advantage of, when I came up with the idea for the thing about home, sitting in my garden in the year 2020 during the pandemic, like everybody else, and kind of thinking about, and by the way, I was not a pandemic gardener. I had been gardening before. I just want to put that out there. I had been thinking about my legacy as a writer. And even though I loved what I wrote, I have thousands of very positive reviews from readers and have sold a lot, even on my own. I knew that this story that I came up with for the thing about home, that I wanted it to have a broader reach. And so I was talking to a friend of mine's about it, who is, published with William Morrow, and she's Vanessa Riley. She has books everywhere. And so she said, Rhonda, you need to come back into traditional publishing. Like, what's your reason for not doing that? And I was just like, I kind of like doing stuff on my own. And she says, yeah, but if you want this book to do what you desire it to do, you're going to need a traditional funnel. And she was right, because I think that there are a lot of people who are extremely successful self-publishing. I personally was one of them. When I say extremely successful, in my opinion, if you can pay all your bills, you're eating well, like nothing, you're lacking nothing from being self-published, you're successful. Okay. And some people say you're successful no matter what. Even if one person buys a book, we define success differently. For me, I'm not trying to work at Walmart and sell these books. To me, that was really successful. Now, clearly, there are a lot of people who make a whole lot more money than I do, being self-published. Running these massive businesses, I mean, it's like a machine. And so I I did not want to do what was necessary to kick up to the next level, which was going to be learn how to use Amazon and social media ads, be willing to invest the kind of budget in that had to be done. I hated it. And what I hated about it was the algorithms constantly switching. So you've got an ad that's running hot, hot, hot. It's running, you're doing well, you're selling, and then you wake up one morning and it's a disaster. It is totally tanked because somebody changed their algorithm. You have no control over that. And I'm 58 years old. I don't want to learn all these numbers and clicks per inch and clicks per second. Like I just didn't want to do it. So I thought I should go back into traditional publishing with this. I have a project that I think a publisher would want. I pitched it. The first person I pitched it to bought it, and here we are. And so I have enjoyed the distribution funnel. I have enjoyed the all of the new readers that I've gotten. One thing that I have learned, and I always share with any writers group, especially for anyone who's there who is indie published and is planning to traditionally publish. I didn't believe this when I heard it because it really didn't make sense to me. But the reason publishers don't necessarily care if you're self-published, unless you're like a self-publishing megastar, somebody who's, selling $250,000 in books a year, is because your readers who buy your indie books and the people who buy your traditional books will be different. And I absolutely did not believe that, but it's true.
Mm-hmm.
Readers come in at certain price points. Typically self-published books are a little less expensive, maybe a lot less expensive. My self-published ebooks were ranged between $2.99 for novellas, and I think the most I went up to was $5.99 for a novel. My ebooks with Thomas Nelson are $11.99, and then the paperbacks are $18, whereas my paperbacks were like 10, maybe 12. I have a lot of readers that have not gone with me with that. I can tell from what they're clicking on in my newsletters. I can tell they have not gone with me. And so what was said about that was absolutely, you couldn't have convinced me. Now, there are some that have, but there are quite a many that have not. And so I learned a lesson about that they, in that respect, they know what they're talking about.
Well, did they say why people don't make the switch?
Because they like books in a certain price point.
Okay.
And so they may pick it up when it becomes $1.99, when it goes on sale, but they're not bringing you on for readers that are only willing to pay $1.99 for an ebook. Yeah. So.
Wow. Well, since you are so successful at making so many books, can you talk about or give advice on how to create multiple novels at the same time or around the same time? Because there are many of us that will have challenges just getting one out the door, but you're getting multiples out the door.
So when you say at the same time, what do you mean at the same time?
You might be writing more than one at the same time, or you might be writing one but editing another around the same time.
I never do that.
You never do that? Okay.
I'm not capable of it. I mean, I don't do that. So what I do is, I'm a one book at a time kind of girl, which hurts me. I think I'd probably have 50 books if I could do that. I have had to pause, like with the thing about home. I did have to pause the writing of Bitter and Sweet, maybe to look at final proofs on the thing about home. And it took me time to get back into my book, but that was it. It was, what has happened is my books have been spaced enough that I just haven't had to do that. With respect to my indie projects, I did have, a lot of them were sort of spaced out because, like I said, I started off in 2013 with Breaking All the Rules. And then that was July of 2013. And then my next book, that was August of 2013. Then my next book wasn't until like October of the next year. And then the next book wasn't until summer of the following year. So I was still working full time. I didn't stop working full time until 2018. And in 2018, when I stopped working, I was supposed to start writing immediately, but I think that being nervous about supporting myself as a writer sort of took over, and I took every editing job that came my way. And so I was editing more than I was writing. It wasn't until I realized that I think it was the Christmas of 2020, close to Christmas of 2020, I decided to do National Novel Write Month. I wrote a book for Nano. I felt like I got to get back into this. I've been gardening. I've been sitting around being in the pandemic and not being productive, editing other people's work, but not creating my own work, which was the reason I quit my job. So I did National Novel. I had a manuscript that was an absolute mess. When I say I've written 28 books, that's one of them. It's the only thing I've ever written that's not published because it was just a disaster of a mess, me trying to get it done, and a 60,000 word book done in a month. I will edit it this fall and get it out. It's a beautiful story and I love it. But because of that, I said, well, let me just write a novella. I had already sort of drafted part of a novella. I released that novella for that Christmas, and it was the first book in the Bennett series. It was supposed to be a one-off, just a novella for the holidays. People fell in love with the characters. The men had all these brothers and cousins, and they asked me, are you going to write more about these men? And I thought, well, why? Like, you guys want this from me? Because it was sort of billionaire romance. I didn't even read that stuff. He just happened to be rich. It was like a Cinderella story. And so they were like, no, we want more, right? So I wrote the second book, and they bought that. And then so y'all are gonna keep buying these books. I wrote the third one. And so I was releasing them every 2 months, and until I released 10 of them. And so so they just really sold well for me. So but oh, that's not true. I did write 2 books at once. I
Okay.
wrote a Bennett book. Okay, here we go. I wrote a Bennett book, and I also I ghost wrote a book for a Hollywood producer, and it was a fiction novel based on a script that he had,
Okay.
which ended up not being anything. I created the story. His script, it went off script. So I was writing that novel at the same time that I was writing one of my Bennett books, but that's the only time I've ever done that. And it was
Okay.
really hard, but I was really motivated because he was paying a lot of money.
Okay. Well, I'm one of the fans that was introduced to your books by reading A Thing About Home. And it was partly romance, but it was more of a woman, what they call women's fiction, centered around a
Mhm.
woman and finding herself. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was
Thank
different
you.
because you're welcome. It was, her journey, but also you had a flashback sequence when you learned about her ancestors, because it was
Mhm.
definitely important to the story, since she was discovering, her father's side of the family for the first time. So what was
Right.
some of the inspiration behind that story, since it's different from your others up until that point?
Yeah, very different. I'm definitely in a different space. Women's fiction. You couldn't have told me that I would write women's fiction. If there was anything that I was going to do like next as a genre, it was definitely going to be mystery or thriller, because I've always wanted to do that. But I was sitting in my garden thinking about, like I said, my legacy as a writer. And I thought, I want to write something serious. I loved reading historical fiction, absolutely loved it, and was studying South Carolina history because my son and I moved to South Carolina from Atlanta right before the pandemic. Actually, we didn't move. We were there for an extended visit and got caught in South Carolina during the pandemic, and I decided to stay with my parents. And so I have homeschooled my son, and we were studying South Carolina history, and I was learning so much about South Carolina that I never knew. And I thought, God, this stuff is so interesting. Like, I want to write a book that like includes some of this kind of stuff. But again, I was in that same place I was in 2013, where I had sort of personally pigeonholed myself in, and I decided my readers won't want that from me. They want romance from me. Clearly, they're buying the Bennetts. This is what people want from me. So I thought, well, how can I make this work? And so I knew that the lead character, and the thing about Home is the story of an influencer, a social media influencer named Casey Black, who is, as she's about to walk down the aisle to renew her vows at 7 years, her husband pulls her aside and tells her he cannot remarry her. This is particularly distressing because this wedding is a very public wedding. She has millions of people waiting for it to happen. And so after he leaves her, she's devastated. She does what she does all the time. She lives her life out publicly. And so she makes a video and it goes very badly for her. And so her brand is ruined. She decides she needs to get out of town. And she comes up with this idea to come to South Carolina to try to find her father's side of the family, who she's never known. He died before she was born, and her mother sort of kept her away from them. And she decides now is the time. You know, I've lost my husband, I've lost my business. Now's the time. What she doesn't expect to find is a 99-year-old grandmother on a 300-acre vegetable farm. Family journals that date back to 1867, and new love. And so when I came up with when I had the idea for Casey, I knew that I needed to merge what I was already doing with with this new thing. So the idea for her to be a social media influencer, I felt like my current readers would maybe follow me to a character that was like that, somebody who's involved in fashion, and that if there was an element of romance in it, which it does have a very strong romance, that they would follow me with the romance. I did not intend, the book was not sold to my publisher as a novel that was written in dual timeline. It was supposed to be a contemporary novel. And what happened is, as I started writing the book, the chapters that were the scenes that were supposed to include these journals from 1867, they were coming up flat. I was failing to execute them. And so one night I went to bed, I woke up at 2 a.m. I saw this woman washing blood off her hands in a river. And I got to my laptop and I had typed the first chapter that went back to 1867. So I thought, okay, well, this is interesting, but this is not what I do. Then it happened again. And I thought, okay, is this going to keep happening? And so I contacted my editor and I said, I need to meet with you. Like this thing is happening. I'm going back in time. And the grandmother, what was the grandfather is now a grandmother. And so like if I have these changes. And so she said she loved the idea that it was just, she was going to meet a grandmother because it's women's, like it could be fully a women's story, and that we would work out the dual timeline. Because I was concerned, like I've never done this. What do I know about writing historical fiction? I read historical fiction, doesn't mean I know how to write it. And so it was just, it worked out. It was just, she didn't have to change a thing. We didn't have to work through anything. She was just like, you're a natural at this. Like, you're a natural. And I think it came from reading all of the historical fiction that I had read. Yep. And then for my second, but it was only about 25% of the novel was historical, whereas now Bitter and Sweet, my second novel, the one that came out this past June, 50% of this book is written in the past. So I don't know. My mentor is an author named Victoria Christopher Murray. You may know her for co-writing one of the biggest books of the year 2021, The Personal Librarian. Yes. Yeah. She said to me, because she read the thing, obviously she reads my books before they come out, and she read the thing about home, and she said, you're going to write historical fiction. Like, that's where you're headed. You've got a historical voice. I don't know if that's true. I'm still writing contemporary and with elements of heritage that go back. And so I'm not sure that I would, I don't know. We'll see if a project comes along. But yeah, I just sort of, the idea just came from me wanting to do more and sitting with the things that were interesting to me. I think that's so important. I love gardening. I was interested in the legacy of Black farmers. I wanted to include some South Carolina history in my books. I love romance. I love writing a good romance. Although I was getting to a point where I felt like, how many more times can they kiss and move on? I wanted to do a little bit more. And actually they can continue to kiss and move on. But I just felt like I wanted a little bit more. And so I think if I tell people never follow trends, be true to the story that you want to write. Allow your authentic voice to come through. and your gift will make room for you. It really will. It will find its readers if you know, there are other things you have to do, like have a good cover and good editing and, you know, all these things. But, you know, trust the story inside of you. When I came up with this idea for the thing about home, it was really scary for me. Before the book came out, I was so scared because I had gotten into this contract with this huge publisher, HarperCollins, and you know, they're going to expect me to sell a whole lot more books than I was selling on Kindle. And I didn't feel like this energy from my existing readers. I wasn't feeling it. So I'm like, I'm on my own with this. But one of the things that I wanted to do when I wrote this book was the idea, the inspiration for this book came during one of the hardest seasons, I think, in a lot of our lives. You know, like I said, during the pandemic, I wanted readers, when they read this book, to feel like they had a warm hug and a kiss from their grandmother. I wanted them to enjoy the food. I wanted them to enjoy the culture. I wanted them to meet the Gullah Geechee people. I just wanted it to be like a romance with readers. And here I am, fast forward a little over a year after this book has been released. And out of the, I don't know, thousands of reviews that this book has, and I don't read them all. I read very few of them, but I'm tagged in a lot of them on Instagram. I'm very active, more on Instagram than any other social media. And so Bookstagram, people tag you in their reviews, you know, in your, I guess, the positive ones, I don't know. And so over and over and over and over again, people have said, I felt like I was with my grandmother. I felt like I got a warm hug from like they literally said the things that were in my head and in my heart about the book. So I feel like that's a thing that this experience that I'm having is not something unique to me. That if you just love your story enough, trust your voice, don't let noise from the outside come in and tell you this is wrong, or it has to be this genre, or it has to be this long, or it has to be this many words, or you have to have, you know, this character here. You gotta have more diversity, less diversity, you know, all of these things. Just write the story you want to write. Trust the editors that you work with, or your critique partners. Trust the people who give you feedback. Because I'm a strong believer in trusting an editor, and you have a great book.
Okay. Well, I have a couple of more questions. One, where to start with your catalog? You have, you know, over 20 some books. If someone has just discovered you, you know, what's a good book to start with?
Well, you know, I'm always telling anybody that wants to start with them, you need to start with the one I'm trying to sell. Okay, so that's going to be bitter. That's going to be bitter and sweet. And so Bitter and Sweet is the story of two estranged sisters who are at a crossroad in their life when they receive a text message from their grandmother telling them to come home from the upstate of South Carolina to the Low Country. They think they're coming because their grandfather, who's been sick, is perhaps more sick. But when they arrive, their grandmother has charged them to reopen the family restaurant, which has been in the family for 87 years, but has been closed since the grandfather's illness. But these two sisters don't have a relationship. So there's a lot going on in the kitchen that has nothing to do with cooking. And there's a historical story that is the story of their great-great-grandmother as she is building this restaurant business. And she is starting her life in 1915 through the years of 1938. So it sort of spans, you know, from those early years until 1938, when she finally, you know, I won't say has a restaurant. Obviously she does. It's been in family 87 years. But so it's a story of women sort of finding out that the things that they deal with in the present are very similar to the things that their grandmother dealt with in the past. And so they learn lessons about resilience and that they have good DNA and they're from good stuff. And even though right at that moment their lives are really hard, that they can persevere and they can shift, things can shift, and they can go a different way because they have the example of their ancestor. And so what I love about this story is so many people, and it has a mental health rep. There's actually therapy on the page, lots of food, you know, a really hot Gullah chef, because there's always going to be some romance in a Rhonda McKnight book. But it's largely, it's probably the book that I'm most proud of.
Okay. All right. since you're now, writing so many different romances, but also, this women's fictions, are there any writers that you would recommend people check out?
Writers that I recommend people check out. I'm a fan of Denny Bryce. She also writes Dual Timeline, and gave me a lovely quote for my book. I was so shy to ask her, and she loved it. I'm a fan of Vanessa Riley.
Yes.
I read a lot of Vanessa Riley. Oh gosh, who are my people? I've recently, one of my really good friends, there's a book that I absolutely fell in love with. Please do not all come down. The Sisterhood Bookshop, also women's fiction with some romance in it, by Michelle Lindo Rice, brand new. I just didn't really enjoy this. Oh my gosh, Tara Shelton Harris. She's a contemporary writer, but One Summer in Savannah was a huge book. I already have her other second book on my shelf. I haven't read it yet. I loved, one of the things I think I like to learn from other people's books is what was, because her book was a big book, like it was a Target book club pick. It came out with a lot of press and sold really well. And so I always like to look and think, what was different about this story? What was unique about it that made it, have this unbelievable start? And so things like that make me sort of think about my stories to make sure at 28 books that I'm not writing about the same people. You can fall into that trap. And that I'm doing something new. I'm challenging myself to do something new. I do like to read thrillers. I haven't been able to read as many of those as I would like, because I'm just in this cycle where, my publisher's asking me to blurb arcs, and my friends are releasing books. And so it's just like, I'm rarely getting to any sort of new material that like stuff I'll find on my own. So
yeah, okay.
But I do a lot of audiobooks. I'm a big audiobook fan, so that helps me when I'm driving and when I'm washing dishes and stuff. I get a lot of reading in that way too.
Okay. Well, Rhonda, thank you so much. At this point, I open it up to anybody who might have questions for Rhonda. Just let me know.
Fire away. One other thing I want to say is I used to, that's not in my bio, is I used to acquire fiction for a small boutique publisher. Some years back, I actually published 4 books through this imprint of Brown Girls Books, discovered very quickly that I did not like working with authors in that way, and left that alone. So I do have some experience with what it's like on the, as a person who has an inbox full of queries, what we look for, why things get rejected, that sort of thing.
You and others.
So if anybody has any questions in that vein, I can kind of answer them.
Okay. I had someone. Okay. Yes.
Hey, so how much time do you devote to researching for your books? As I'm a big researcher. Sometimes I get a little in over my head sometimes. I'm writing a general suspense / comedy. And so what I've been doing is I've been getting books about how guns operate, because I want to get as close as accurate as possible. And I even found a really useful book recommended through Writer's Digest called How to Hide Your Assets and Disappear, which had an unfortunate effect when a friend of the family came to visit. They saw the books I was reading and they said, Julia, what are you
she might have
planning?
Okay.
So yeah, so how much time do you devote? And once you got everything you want, I mean, how do you decide what to leave in the book and what to leave out? Because I'm just finding so much.
Okay, so the first part is the hard part. I am an over researcher. I like researching more than I like writing. I think I like a lot of things more than I like writing, but I love doing research. And so I go down the rabbit hole. And so what I usually do now that I'm writing books that include, because the habit of researching before is worse. Like I always had to do research with my contemporary books because, of course, you get past a point where you are writing things that you know when you have like, 15 books or so. You know, at this point, I'm not writing things that I know. I'm writing things that I have to research heavily. That began fairly early in my career, because I don't know that I really ever wrote a lot of what I know. So I always loved doing the research, and I would just sort of do it until I felt like I had what I needed. Now that I'm doing books that include actual history, I'm out of control. So what I do is I give myself a deadline. Like, research has to end on this date, because I figure out how, like, if I have the deadline with my publisher, I back into that deadline, because I'm a person who I have a structured outline. I write to the outline to a certain extent. I always go off, and create some other stuff. But for the most part, I do start with an outline. And if I know I need to write a 90,000 word book, and I know that for the first couple of weeks, I'm only going to get 500 words out a day, and that's going to like practically kill me to do it. And I know at the end, I become a 7,000 word, maniac. I figure out exactly how much time I have to do my draft. And I know how much time it takes me to go back through a novel. So I figure out my schedule. And so then I figure out whatever's left. If it's 2 weeks, if it's 3 weeks, this is what I have for research. And so research also happens in those early writing days. So like I said, I typically start out writing, like struggling to get 500 words a day, for at least the first 2 weeks of a project. And so because I'm only writing 500 words a day, I'm also doing some of the research there too, because it doesn't take me very long to write that awful 500 words that I'm going to get on paper. And so I do some research there too. So so the research I have to discipline myself. I stick to the schedule that I have created. When research time is done, it's done. And any additional research that I have to do is usually just sort of things that I can do very quickly. Like, I need to find out, like, what day was Saturday such and such in 1932, like stuff like that I can quickly go look. The other part is the easier part. I teach a writing workshop. I've taught it for 13 years, and I'll start on October 1. I'll be teaching the next cycle of it. And one of the things that I have learned, and one of the things that I share with people, is I'm a huge proponent of every word in a story counting. If the research does not move, whatever I know, whatever I have to say here doesn't move the story forward, I don't use it. It's just as simple as that. Like, every line matters. So I may have hours and hours of research to create like 2 sentences in the book, or a paragraph in the book. And I love it. And I sure wish I could share all this, but it's got to go in the author's note or something like that. It can't go in the book, because my stories are, if I do say so myself, I write a page turner. I want you to keep turning the page. Otherwise, they're going to put it down. Readers don't sign up to learn things. They do, but they don't. And so, every line, whatever is I need to make the story move, is what makes it into the book. And I think that makes it easy for me not to figure out what of my research to include.
Okay. Rhonda, there's some questions in the chat. One is about the critique group that you were in. The question is, was it only romance Christian romance and or general fiction?
There were people writing like all kinds of stuff. Who was writing romance? Very few people were actually writing romance. One out of the 10 of us, there probably was 2 people writing romance.
Okay.
But the Georgia Romance Writers group, that group, aside from the critique group, that group was, mostly romance writers. But yeah, out of our critique group, most of us are sort of writing just contemporary general fiction.
Okay. One question is from Rebecca Dalton. How do you keep positive attitude and keep pushing through doubts?
I quit my job in 2018, and I got to push through. So what I do is, I have always done this, is I really believe in networking and building a circle of writer friends that will encourage you. We all have days when we're down, and we all have days when we're up. And so what usually happens is, on the day that I'm down, somebody else is up, and we sort of pull each other, we keep each other up. Like, it's rare that I have a conversation with an author friend and we're both in the same slump. Or if we are, by the time we're done, we're just like, girl, but God, we're Christian writers, and so we move on,
Yeah.
But it's largely my circle of friends. And honestly, when I am, because I've been in this state, the proposal that I gave my publisher, they wanted it. We couldn't come to an agreement on some terms. I'm not going to get into what that was. You probably could guess. And so now I'm thinking, well, I need to give you something else, because that to me merits this. And so now let me give you something else. So I'm back into writing another proposal, which I hate doing. And so, and it's delaying. Like, I'm not going to have I'm not going to have a book next year. Hopefully, if I can get this together and they like it, I'll have one in 2026. So, but I have friends that have great things happening. Like yesterday, Piper Hughley announced her book was optioned for a film. And so, but she's the kind of person, like, I knew that was coming. And so she and I had a conversation, and we have the same agent even. And so we had a conversation last week where she sort of rubbed my back and said, girl, get it together, So it's really the people in my world. It's also the fact that this is what I do professionally. And I keep my mental health and all of that together by doing other things. I journal. I think that everybody has to find the activities that are, what do they call it? Mindfulness, whatever your mindfulness activities are that keep your mental health together, figure out what they are and lean into that.
Okay. She has a follow-up question, which is, what is your best craft tips for creating interesting characters and compelling storylines?
That's a big question. So I'll try to answer it somewhat. My best craft tip on creating compelling characters is, one of the things I do in my writing workshop is I teach writers. I give them the writer, fill out this writing resume situation, exercises around things like, oh, your people are coming to your character's house for dinner. What is she serving and what kind of plates and the whole thing? Like, I give people these exercises to do. However, I teach them, once we do this, that you need to understand that the people you're creating are not these people on this paper. Your characters are going to come alive as you write your book. They're going to, and you have to let them. Whatever the idea that you have in your mind about who your character is, if it shifts, be okay with it, even if it means you have to go back in and make adjustments to your outline, or, oh, I thought I was doing this and now I'm doing that. Allow them to be human and allow them to show up. Don't fight your characters. The other tip that I have is another craft tip as I have, and I know that some people, don't agree with this. I think most people do agree with it. It's not to fight the editorial process by trying to write one day, edit later in the day, write, edit, write. That's a mess. I'm a proponent of people just throw up on the page and get that book out. And I don't believe that. I strongly believe that draft writing is a completely creative, right-brained process. And editing is a left-brain, completely logical process. And as most of us are left-brain people, because in this country we're taught, even our education system teaches you to be left-brain. It's, that if you start engaging that left brain, you are going to, talk yourself right out of your book. Because it's not supposed to be good in the first draft. I mean, who are you? Toni Morrison? No. So just get the book out, and then revision is where the beautiful the beauty of writing happens, and then self-editing is where you polish it up. So don't mix those three. So yeah, that's my major, because I meet people that are stuck often. I do some coaching and they're stuck, and what I always find out what they're doing is they're always mixing those processes. And read lots of great books.
All right. Any questions? Any other questions? All right, I don't see anything in the chat.
Rhonda,
right.
thank you so much for joining us this evening. This was absolutely wonderful. I can't thank you enough for everything that you've shared with us.
Yes.
Thank you so much for having me. I love, like I said, I teach a writing workshop. I do some freelance editing. I love talking to writers. It's like the fun part. I love talking to readers too. Like I love book club meetings too. I guess I really love it all, but I really do. I'm a writer's author, and so I love talking to writers. So it was I consider it my reasonable service to be able to share, some of the things that I've learned, and hopefully they will help people, sort of miss pitfalls. And one thing I want to say is don't be like me, get a critique and walk away from your gift for 2 years. Don't do that.
And I want to thank Tara also for some wonderful questions for Rhonda. Tara, another great interview. Appreciate it.
Thank you.